Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this press conference today. My name is Lynn Davidson. I'm the COP26 President's Press Secretary and I will be moderating this session. I will hand over now to the COP President-designate Alok Sharma for some opening remarks. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm here with my friends and colleagues, State Secretary Jochen Flasbarth and Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, whom I requested to lead the work on this delivery plan. We have worked closely together, and I want to thank them for their immense and tireless efforts, and also, of course, for the efforts of all the officials who have been involved and the OECD who have verified these numbers in the delivery plan. I asked Jochen and Jonathan to lead on putting together this delivery plan in July, because I'm very well aware of just how important the $100 billion goal is. And I'm clear as COP26 President that we must respond to calls from developing countries for predictability and clarity on finance, calls which are absolutely justified. To recap, the $100 billion goal is a sum that developed countries promise to mobilize each year from 2020 to 2025 to help developing nations tackle climate change. That commitment, as you'll recall, was first made in 2009 and then reaffirmed in 2015 in Paris. Now, we know that the last set of verified figures that we have are for 2019, when around $80 billion was mobilized. And that means that the goal was almost certainly missed in 2020, though of course we will only see the data in 2022 from the OECD on this particular year. Now, understandably, this has been a source of deep frustration for developing countries, and I absolutely get this. Through the UK's COP26 and G7 presidencies, we have urged developed countries to make ambitious new climate finance pledges ahead of COP. And many have done so, as indeed have multilateral development banks. And the aim of this delivery plan was to demonstrate how collectively donors will meet the goal to 2025 and so help to rebuild trust with developing countries. Now, the plan provides confidence that the $100 billion will be met in 2023, and importantly, it projects that the $100 billion will be exceeded in subsequent years, with up to $117 billion being mobilized in 2025. The OECD report, which is of course published alongside the delivery plan, shows that it is likely that $500 billion will be mobilized over the 5 years from 2021 to 2025. And there are reasons to have confidence in this plan. First, the ambitious new public commitments made over the past months by countries make the $100 billion possible. Many countries have stepped up, with some doubling and even quadrupling their commitments, and a full list of these countries is set out on the COP26 website. Secondly, the plan is intentionally conservative on how much private finance will be directly mobilized by developed countries. It's worth noting that in the higher financing scenario 1 in the OECD report, the private finance mobilization ratio is the lowest observed over the 2016 to 2019 period. All in all, this plan marks significant progress on a totemic issue. But of course, our task on climate finance is far from complete. And crucially, we must increase the sums available for climate adaptation, and we must also urgently improve access to finance. So our work continues, but we have reached a significant milestone today, one that I hope will start to restore trust and build momentum in this final stretch ahead of COP26. And with those opening words, I'm going to hand over to Minister Flasbarth.
Thank you so much, COP President, dear Alok, dear Jonathan Wilkinson over in Canada, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm really very glad to present today, together with my colleague Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister from Canada, the Climate Finance Delivery Plan, which we internally sometimes also call the $100 billion delivery plan. And it goes back, as the president mentioned, to 2009 in Copenhagen, when the developed countries the first time promised to deliver collectively $100 billion annually as of 2020 for developing countries. And I want to say a few words more about that. As some of you, or many of you might recall, with the Copenhagen conference, the international negotiation process ended in serious trouble. And there were basically two pillars to recover the international climate negotiation process. One was the national voluntary climate targets, what we later on called the national determined contribution. That was on the substance, what we do for climate. And the second pillar was a collective promise to mobilize 100 billion for developing countries, as I said, as of 2020. This commitment later entered also in the Paris decision package, as the president mentioned, and it was extended that the 100 billion will continue annually until 2025, and that a process will be launched to discuss how to proceed after 2025. With this short historic reference, it becomes I think very clear that delivering on the $100 billion pledge is essential for keeping trust on all sides, and trust being the most relevant currency during climate negotiations. But it is much more than this trust-building momentum. Climate finance from the global north to the global south, specifically to least developed countries and the most vulnerable countries, has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with something like generosity of developed countries towards a developing country. It is, on the contrary, an integral, essential part of global climate policy. It is a key requirement of fairness, responsibility, and the need to mutually implement the Paris targets. During the last decade, I need to say, developed countries and multinational development banks made really substantial progress to deliver on their pledge. We have done collectively a lot, but latest analysis shown, as the president said, that we fell short in 2019 with around about $20 billion US. And against that background, I was really honored to co-lead the development of a plan when and how the $100 billion will be met together with Jonathan Wilkinson. The climate finance delivery plan we have sent today to the president shows where we stand each year until 2025, hence providing transparency and predictability for developing countries. I'm very happy to say that the process to work on the plan already created some momentum. We have seen a number of substantial additional pledges since July this year. The result is that we will make significant progress towards 100 billion already next year. They get into reach. We are not there. We will not be there in 2022. But in 2023, finally, we reach or even surpass this target. While it remains extremely unfortunate that the commitment will not be reached in due time, the figures clearly illustrate that the gap at the beginning will be closed thereafter. Still, I urge developed countries and MDBs to continue in their efforts to even increase climate finance to the highest possible range. We can illustrate with a table that is in our report that we will significantly exceed the 100 billion in 2024 and 25 already. Just let me end by saying that from a national perspective, although we are doing this in our personal capacity, Germany will remain strongly committed. In 2020, we delivered 7.8 billion US dollars for climate finance, and we made provisions already to increase this financing during the next years substantially. Thank you. And with this, I hand over directly, if I understand it right, to my dear colleague, Jonathan Wilkinson.
Thank you very much, Jochen, and thank you, Alok. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. 6 years ago, the world came together in Paris and signed an agreement that signaled a turning point in the fight against climate change. It was a collective commitment to give the world that we pass down to our children a fighting chance. And since then, I think it's fair to say that we've accomplished a lot. Certainly, recently, countries representing well over half of the world's GDP have made collective commitments that are 1.5 degrees aligned, and we are all working to see further ambition as we move forward to Glasgow. But while Paris was about promises, I think Glasgow 6 years later is also about trust and delivery. Si Paris était une question de promesse, Glasgow 6 ans plus tard est une question de confiance et de résultats. In 2015, as my friend Jochen said, developed and developing countries established a goal for the developed world to mobilize $100 billion per year through 2025 for developing countries to adapt to and to fight climate change. To recognize that historically the developed world has been primarily responsible for the carbon emissions that cause climate change. I think the importance of this $100 billion goal can't be overstated. When the recent OECD report indicated that the developed world would almost certainly miss this target for 2020, the developing world was disappointed, and that eroded trust. Afin de s'assurer que l'objectif de 100 milliards de dollars soit atteint, la présidence de la COP a demandé à tous les pays développés d'intensifier leurs efforts de doubler leurs engagements financiers en matière de climat. Le Canada a levé la main et l'a fait, doublant sa promesse à 5,3 milliards de dollars. And Canada raised its hand and did just that, doubling our pledge to $5.3 billion. COP26 President Alok Sharma then asked Canada and Germany to develop and deliver a plan detailing when and how this goal could and would be met. Just a few months ago, I think there was significant concern that the developed world would not meet this goal. And I hope my friend Jochen does not mind me saying that when we were first asked to take on this role, I believe he described our task as potentially amounting to mission impossible. Today, I am very pleased to say that we are delivering on this important goal that was established years ago. The delivery plan that we have submitted to the COP presidency reflects the collective effort of many countries who stepped up to increase their climate finance pledges, with substantial new pledges from a number of countries in order to ensure that climate finance ambition is at an all-time high. The delivery plan provides transparency as to when and how the world will meet this goal. It is our expectation that significant progress will be made in 2022 and that the goal of 100 billion should be achieved in 2023 and in the following years beyond that. We know and acknowledge that there is still much work to do. But today, I think we are telling countries around the world that they can trust in the goals that we collectively establish in the fight against climate change. This is a critical moment to deliver on a critical promise, and Canada is certainly pleased to have played an active role in bringing together support from donor countries. Aujourd'hui, je suis heureux de dire que nous sommes en train de réaliser l'objectif important qui a été établi il y a des années. Le plan de mise en œuvre que nous avons soumis à la présidence de la COP reflète l'effort collectif des nombreux pays qui ont augmenté leurs engagements en matière de financement climatique, avec de nouveaux engagements substantiels de la part d'un certain nombre de pays afin de garantir que l'ambition en matière de financement climatique n'a jamais été aussi élevée. Nous pensons que des progrès significatifs seront réalisés en 2022 et que l'objectif de 100 milliards de dollars devrait être atteint de 2023 et au cours des années suivantes jusqu'en 2025. Nous savons et reconnaissons qu'il reste encore beaucoup de travail à faire, mais aujourd'hui, nous disons aux pays du monde entier qu'ils peuvent avoir confiance dans les objectifs que nous établissons collectivement dans la lutte contre le changement climatique. Il s'agit d'un moment crucial pour tenir une promesse essentielle et le Canada est heureux d'avoir joué un rôle aussi actif pour réunir le soutien des pays donateurs. The story is in some ways not unlike our domestic climate action story in Canada. At Paris in 2015, governments established important targets, but did not present detailed plans about how they were going to deliver them. And certainly for us, after Paris, we got straight to work and developed what I would say is one of the most concrete and detailed plans that exists anywhere in the world. That has enabled Canada to further step up our ambition and establish an even more ambitious target. And it allowed Canadians to trust that we would deliver. Canadians once again sent this government back to work just a month ago with a strong mandate to go further and faster on climate action. I entered politics 6 years ago in large measure because of my concern about climate change and my desire to see Canada play a constructive role in international discussions on this important subject. And I am thus personally very gratified to have played a small role in this important climate finance process. As many have said, we are running out of time. We can and must, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson is, I think, fond of saying, ensure that the Glasgow COP represents the beginning of the end of climate change. Today's delivery plan is, I believe, an important step towards a successful COP. I certainly want to thank Alok Sharma for trusting us to deliver on this commitment, and I am immensely grateful to State Secretary Flasbarth for all his tireless, invaluable work and his very, very thoughtful counsel. I would be remiss if I also didn't thank all of our respective officials who have worked so very hard over these past months to enable us to deliver on this plan. Maintenant, alors que nous dirigeons vers la COP26, je suis très heureux de poursuivre sur notre lancée en matière d'ambition et de réalisation afin de construire un avenir meilleur for nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. As we head to COP26, I certainly look forward to continuing our momentum on ambition and on delivery to build a better future for all of our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you once again, Alok, for trusting us with this important task.
Thank you, ministers all, and thank you to our Facebook Live audience. We will now move to a question and answer session with journalists present. Right, can I ask journalists please to raise a hand if you have a question? May I also ask if you have dialed in? Thank you. We are now finished our Facebook live streaming, and we have now moved to our question and answer media session. Can I ask if you have a question that you raise your hand, and that also if you are dialed in on a phone number or you don't have your name, please can you change that so that I can identify who you are. Now we're just waiting for, with me a second. Can I see, you have to individually unmute yourself when I identify the first question. So I'm trying to see if we have Hannah Thomas Peter on the line. Hannah, are you able to unmute yourself? And will you say who your question is directed to and where you're from as well? Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm Hannah Thomas Peter. I'm a climate change correspondent for Sky News. This is a question for Alok Sharma, please. The details of your announcement reveal that rich nations will not hit the promised funding levels until 2023, which is, whatever the eventual outcome averaged over 5 years, still late. Do you accept that this delay constitutes and continues to constitute a betrayal of trust for developing nations? And as COP26 president, do you accept personal responsibility for that and any potential negative consequences for negotiations at the Glasgow summit?
Thank you very much for that, Hannah. I think the aim of putting this plan together has been to rebuild trust. And as part of the discussions and consultations, obviously, my colleagues have spoken to donor nations, but also to developing country partners as part of this process. And I think that's what this plan does do. We have made progress. We have demonstrated in terms of projections that have been put out there and been verified by the OECD that we will, with confidence, reach the 100 billion in 2023. Of course, as I've acknowledged, that has not happened in 2020. But if you look over the 5-year period, I think we can say with some confidence that we are likely to be able to go over 500 billion. But yeah, this is the start. And we need to ensure that over the next week, and indeed during COP as well, we make more progress in terms of adaptation. Access to finance, again, has been a big issue for very many developing countries. You know, I asked countries to come together back in March at a climate and development ministerial meeting. And coming out of that, we have set up a access to a finance task force chaired together with Fiji. We will at COP26 be setting out some more progress on that and setting out some of the pilot projects in individual countries to address the issue of access to finance. So in summary, Hannah, what I would say is that, you know, we are seeing progress through this delivery plan. I think this is the most transparent set of forecasts of this nature that we've ever had. But of course, countries will need to deliver on this. And secondly, there is more to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now call on Frank Jordans, please, if you were able to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hello, Frank Jordans from the Associated Press. Another question for Alok Sharma, again in the same vein. I mean, the reactions so far that we've been getting from campaigners and developing countries have been quite disappointed about this report. What makes you think that developing countries will come to COP with the kind of positive attitude that you need to reach deals on so many of the important issues in the next 2 weeks?
Well, Frank, as I said, you know, we've had discussions throughout, and Jochen and Jonathan may want to elaborate, but we've had discussions in putting this plan together with developing nations as well. And obviously, you know, over the last 24 hours, we have individually spoken to developing countries. The colleagues that I've spoken to have welcomed the progress, but I think they would say the same thing that all three of us have done, which is that this is progress, but there is clearly more to do. And there is all to play for at COP in terms of the issues on adaptation. As I said, access to finance, you will find, is again a big issue for very many developing countries, and we will be addressing that through the pilots which we'll set out at COP itself.
Then may I add a few sentences? Thanks. I just want to echo what Alok Sharma said. I mean, Jonathan and I really pushed developed countries during the last weeks very hard, and not all of our conversations were really seen to be polite. We now can show that we more or less, in average, over the whole time period, we will reach the 100 billion. And yes, there is disappointment, and we share this disappointment. But the result now we have is not bad enough, I would say it this way, for allowing not to be constructive in Glasgow. And now we really urge all parties to come to Glasgow in a spirit to solve the remaining issues. I think we still need to discuss further on climate, definitely, and the issues have been outlined with the president, access to finance, a share of adaptation and mitigation, also grants towards loans. All this needs to be further discussed. There is room for a higher ambition in all of these subjects, but still there is something that is really reasonably answering or delivering on the pledge from 2009.
If I can just add, I agree with everything that my friend Jochen and Alex said. But I would also add that, let's be clear, when the OECD brought out its most recent report everybody reading that report knew that we were not going to achieve the goal in 2020. And certainly there was disappointment at that point in time. And I think there was also fear that that goal would not be achieved within a relevant time frame. And what we have done through the work that has been undertaken is to demonstrate very clearly, is to raise the level of ambition on the part of many countries, many donor countries, and to be able to demonstrate very clearly that this goal will be achieved. And in fact, it will be overachieved in 2024 and 2025, such that as Jochen has said, the overall number for the period will be very close to, or perhaps above, the $100 billion number. So, what I would say is, yes, there certainly was disappointment. There probably still is some disappointment. But I think that what this report has done and the work that went into this report is actually provide optimism that we are going to meet that commitment, which is something that was not true 3 months ago when people looked at the numbers for 2019.
Thank you all. I'd like to now move to Rafi from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Yes, thank you for that. My question is for Minister Wilkinson, although if Secretary Flasbarth wants to jump in as well, please go ahead. I was wondering, in your analysis of the situation, what have you determined were the issues for developed countries in terms of meeting the 100 billion goal in 2020, and what concrete steps are you proposing they take to be able to meet that goal this time around or for the next years? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because I think your question actually allows us to highlight a particular thing that we didn't really speak to in the remarks, which is, by and large, the mobilization of the $100 billion for 2020 fell short because largely private sector mobilization was lower than we anticipated. So money flowing in for climate finance that's enabled through public expenditures was lower than what we anticipated it would be. That the public side of this, in terms of contributions from government, was not far off what folks had actually committed to. And what we have done through the course of this exercise is raise the level of ambition from public finance going forward without making more aggressive assumptions around private sector mobilization. Now, to be clear, we do need to see the private sector step up. We do need to see more funds mobilized. At the end of the day, the scale of the problem with respect to both adaptation and mitigation is such that we need to see trillions of dollars that mobilize for this, not 100 billion. But what we have done in this report is actually raise the level of ambition with respect to the contributions that donor governments and countries make. And concurrently, we know that there's an enormous amount of work on the private sector side going on by people like Mark Carney and others, where we hope to see significant additional private sector mobilization. But we haven't assumed that in the numbers. And in fact, what this shows is a greater level of ambition on the part of donor countries going forward.
If I may add a very few sentences, because I agree to everything Jonathan just said. Looking at the reasons why we didn't reach the leverage factors we assumed a couple of years ago, well, the reasons are very diverse. Some of them actually are good. For example, renewables as a mitigation tool are getting so cost effective that they in many cases do not need any longer public seed money. But there are also some obstacles which we have to discuss and which we have to move away, both on developed countries side and developing countries side, to bring private sector engagement higher.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to Ben Webster from The Times in London.
Hi, thanks very much for taking my question. This is a question for Alok Sharma. He said that it was likely that that 500 billion, I think he said this, we confirm this, would be mobilized over the 5 years from 2021 to 2025, not mentioning 2020. Does that mean that the shortfall in 2020 will not be made up? And if it turns out that there is a shortfall of raising an average of $100 billion a year over 2021 to 25, have you secured commitments that developing countries will make up that shortfall?
Well, Ben, let me take that. So these are forward-looking projections from 2021 to 2025. Obviously, as I set out in my opening remarks, we don't yet have the figures for 2020, so I can't tell you, what they are and what potential shortfalls are. If you look at the OECD report, it has two scenarios in there, and the range of those scenarios, scenario 1 and scenario 2, is over that 5-year period from 497 to 521 billion pounds over that 5-year period. That's why I made the point that I think we can have some confidence that we will go above the 500 billion. In terms of the 2020 figure, we will see what comes forward. But I want to reiterate the point that both Jochen and Jonathan have made, which is, firstly, of course, we want to see further pledges coming forward from countries in terms of climate finance commitments. But I think the second point is on the private sector mobilization point. And as I said, the scenarios that are set out by the OECD are pretty conservative in terms of what will happen in terms of private sector mobilization. And I hope that at COP we may have further announcements when it comes to private sector mobilization as well. So in summary, I think if you look at the OECD reports, it tells you why I'm saying that there is some confidence that the 500 billion plus will be met over that 5-year period. But in terms of 2020, those figures are not yet available. But again, I've been very clear that based on where we were in 2019 and what the projection is for 2021, it is unlikely that the 100 billion was met in 2020.
May I also add a bit here? Yes, and I want to underline the numbers from OECD are absolutely credible. I'm 100% behind these numbers because they are not based on optimistic assumptions. And Jonathan and I agreed from the very beginning, we don't want to clean wash anything. We don't want to look the numbers to be brighter than they are. I personally, I'm absolutely confident that we are on the very safe side there. And at the same time, we are working on enhancing and increasing the leverage ratio. And as I said in my introductory statement, we urge countries not to rest, to continue to increase their finance. I mean, for 2022, the budget planning is done in most of the countries, but for the years thereafter, but more budget plans will come, and there is room for maneuver, and I urge countries to use this room.
Thank you. Friedrich Geiger, can I ask where you're from, if you say where you're from for everybody? Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you for taking my question. It's Friedrich Geiger from Tagesspiegel in Berlin. Could you give us an indication regarding which share of the climate financing will be loans and which share will be grants?
So who's that to?
It's Friedrich Geiger of the newspaper Tagesspiegel in Berlin.
So would you like me to?
Whoever can answer it.
Okay, Jochen, do you want to take that or should I take it?
I was just looking into the OECD report where the figures are. But
I think, right, I think for 2019, if I recall the figures, I think it's around 70% was through loans and the remainder through grants. Obviously, what we want to do is ensure that more funding is coming through grants, and I think that's been one of the pushes that we have had in the conversations with donor nations. And I just want to reiterate this point about this delivery plan. And Jochen and Jonathan have talked about why people should have confidence in it. Obviously, as part of the consultations, whilst this is a plan which has been put together by Germany and Canada, obviously together with the UK, ultimately we have had detailed discussions with donor nations on this issue. So this is ultimately a plan which has the backing of all donors, and now is the time for them to deliver on the projections that are set out. Jochen, did you want to add anything on the grant versus loans issue?
No, I want to underline what you have said, and we can deliver to Mr. Geiger the concrete figures after this press conference.
Thank you. Can I now go to Chloe Ferrand at Climate Home News, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Brilliant. Thank you very much for holding this press conference. Just a quick remark. I was a bit surprised that none of the donor countries are actually named in the report. So I was wondering if you, either Minister Wilkinson or Jochen Flasbarth, can you tell us whether countries have, whether this report includes new pledges from donor countries which maybe haven't been publicly announced? I know that, for example, France, Italy, Australia haven't, I believe, increased their climate finance pledges. So you also mentioned that some more pledges are expected to come but couldn't be finalized in time for this report. So it's just not quite clear which countries increased climate finance contribution are included in this report. So if you could just clarify whether any new pledges came through, I think, since Sweden announced its new pledge last week. Thank you.
Perhaps.
So my understanding, and Alok can correct me, but my understanding is all of the various pledges that have been made will be posted on the COP website. And there have been a number of additional pledges that have been made over the course of the past several months, but in particular over the past 6 weeks. It is true to say that there are at least a couple of countries that we expect may come forward with additional pledges, that we're not in a position to do so before we essentially close the books on this report. And so we look forward to seeing that, and those will obviously also be published on the COP website. But I would say over the course of the work that Jochen and I have done in partnership with Alok, we have seen substantial increases in the level of ambition on the part of a number of countries, and that is all to the good, and will be shown, as I say, with respect to climate finance commitments. They'll be on the COP website.
Yeah, just to add, exactly as Jonathan says, if you look on the COP26 website, there is a compilation of the climate finance commitments that have been made public by countries, and obviously as more pledges are made public, that will be added to.
Many thanks. Now, Suzanne Ellerding, I hope I pronounced your name, please forgive me.
Yes, hello. Thank you for doing this. I'm with Tagesspiegel in Berlin also, and my question comes back to what Alok Sharma says, that we are far from complete. And this new development of the Climate Vulnerable Forum Manifesto that asks for a climate emergency pact that will make funds available for loss and damage. And as I heard today, Nicola Sturgeon from Scotland promised to provide finance for loss and damage. So what can we expect from COP26 in this regard?
So I think in terms of COP26, well, firstly, if I may sort of step back from COP26, we've had a number of ministerial meetings that have taken place. In July, I hosted a ministerial meeting here in London. We had over 50 governments represented. Many of the ministers came in person. We then had the pre-COP meeting in Milan as well. And loss and damage was an issue on the agenda there. And countries spoke about the need for us to operationalize the Santiago network. And clearly, loss and damage will be something that will obviously be under discussion at COP26 as well. Ultimately, the progress that we make at COP26 will be on the basis of consensus, and it's our role as the COP26 presidency to drive consensus on this and other issues. But I certainly recognize that the loss and damage issue is something that is very important for a significant number of countries.
Minister Flasbarth, does anyone else want to add to that, or will I move on to the next? Okay, I'll move on to the next person. Jess Shankelman from Bloomberg.
Hi, thank you very much, everyone. Really interesting press conference and two big reports coming out just at the same time. Vulnerable countries want certainty in order to rebuild the trust. Why are you saying that it's likely that you'll be able to meet 500 billion on average over the 5 years from 20 to 2025? Why can't you promise it to those vulnerable countries?
I don't know who that's directed to.
You.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Look, I mean, this is a set of numbers that have been put together as a result of what donor countries have set out to the OECD. Ultimately, this is for donor nations to deliver on. I think you've heard sort of clearly from us that the projections and some of the assumptions used are conservative. So we feel it will be possible to reach the 500 billion plus over that 5-year period. But this is why I made the point that this is a plan that ultimately is also owned by the donors. They have had a significant input into this, and we will all be watching to make sure that they actually deliver on the commitments that have been made. And I think in the delivery plan, I don't know whether Jochen or Jonathan wants to sort of reflect on this, but I think it does make the point that we ask the OECD to continue its regular review of the climate finance figures, so we can continue to see verification that commitments are actually being met.
Maybe if I can just say a couple things. So one of the things I think that the developing world has been looking for is greater transparency with respect to forward-looking commitments. As you will know, the OECD, which does a very good job of assessing climate finance, is always pretty much backward-looking. Like the report that just came out a few months ago was about 2019. And so we're almost 2 years from looking backwards 2 years in terms of whether we actually achieved the kind of progress we wanted to see or not. I think one of the great values of the work that has been done at the behest of Mr. Sharma is a forward-looking assessment that actually looks at the commitments that governments are willing to make on a go-forward basis, and multilateral development banks going forward over the coming 5 years. And these are numbers that are perhaps in some respects more solid than anything we've seen before. We had countries, in writing put down the commitments that they were making in questionnaires that were then submitted to the OECD. And so I think from the perspective of, do we have greater confidence today versus what we had before this process was underway? I would say absolutely we have much greater confidence that the goal that was agreed upon will in fact be achieved, and in fact will be overachieved beyond 2023. I think that's very good news, and I think that perhaps through this process we've moved the bar in terms of how we can provide greater confidence and transparency going forward.
But if I could just push back on that slightly, I mean, if I was a developing country and my infrastructure was falling apart as a result of climate change, or I wasn't able to invest in the green technologies, I don't think transparency would help me to make those investments. They need the money.
Well, but that's exactly what this is about. It's about mobilizing the money and giving them confidence that the monies are going to continue to flow over the course of the coming years. That's exactly what this is about.
If I may underline that, I mean, we will have close to 100 billion already, very close to 100 billion, 97 billion in the upper range in 2022, next year. And of course, you could do more if there was $3 billion more. But essentially, as I said in the beginning, I'm disappointed as a developing countries, but we also have to see there is a lot of money already on the table. There is a lot of support, and it will increase, and it has to increase.
Thank you, Jess. I hope that's okay. Carl Matheson from Political in Brussels.
Hi, thank you all for doing this. A question, I guess, maybe it's really a yes or no question for Alok Sharma, and then either one of the ministers. I'd like to hear what you also think. But just a technical point, really, like the agreement that was made in 2009 and then again in 2015 wasn't an average. It was an annual commitment to deliver $100 billion. So this is an admission, is it not, that the developed world has breached that commitment?
Well, Carl, I mean, as I said, we don't know what the figures in 2020 are, but I think, you know, given where we were in 2019 and what's being projected for 2021, I think it's highly unlikely that the $100 billion goal for 2020 will be met. And of course, you know, that would be disappointing. And in fact, I think people have, you know, understood that that is highly unlikely. What we have tried to do here with this forward-looking delivery plan is to give confidence about what will come in subsequent years. And I think, as you've heard from all three of us, you know, we believe that you know, this is a plan which sets out in quite some detail, also when you take into account the OECD report, what is likely to come forward in each of the following years. And it is a plan that has been put together based on detailed information that has come through questionnaires, as Jonathan said, to the OECD, who have verified the numbers, taken out any potential double counting issues. And therefore, what you have, I think, is a robust set of figures. So people should have confidence that the numbers that are projected will come through. But in terms of 2020, yes, I think it's highly unlikely that that goal of 100 billion was not met. And yes, I share that disappointment.
Exactly, but again, and I don't want to be misunderstood. Jonathan and I, we while are not in a role of spokespersons for developed countries. We just try to be as honest as possible, as pushy as possible, and then at the end providing the data we have. And it is true, in 2020, as Alok Sharma said, we will not meet, it's very, very unlikely to meet 100 billion. It's in a way obvious. So yes, the developed world did not deliver on the commitment, yes. But the commitment was to continue annually by 100 billion. And at the end, our figures indicate very clear that at the end it will be more. Yes, it's not right that the developed country didn't do it in due time, but we do more at the end, and that is a positive message. And as I said, we will need to do more during the next years, and the numbers can go higher than the 117 at the upper range in the OECD scenario.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? A lot of your calls for countries to deliver new NDCs have been based on, you know, certain readings of essentially international agreements. Doesn't this just undermine the trust in the process? And maybe this is a question for Alok Sharma. Doesn't that undermine those calls?
Well, I mean, I would say the fact that we have set this out so clearly, and people can see the forward projections, I hope that actually starts to restore trust in the system. You know, of course, the promise was made from 2020 onwards. We were pretty unlikely to have got there in 2020, and we've seen the projections for 2021. But the intention of this delivery plan has been to try to restore trust in the system. As I said, you know, we've had conversations with developing countries as well as part of this process, and indeed over the last 24 hours as well. And I think there is an acknowledgement that progress has certainly been made through this delivery plan.
If I can just add, I think that one of the things that I would point out again is when the OECD numbers came out recently, it was very clear that it was extremely unlikely that the 2020 number would be achieved. And to the United Kingdom's credit, it actually made the decision that much more needed to be done to ensure that that goal would be achieved within a relevant time frame. And that's why Mr. Sharma, asked Germany and Canada to essentially lead this process. Is we needed to, in the aftermath of the OECD numbers, to be able to actually demonstrate that this could be achieved and when it would be achieved in order to build trust. And as my friend Jochen said, we have met with developing countries as well as developed countries through this process. Of course, everybody is disappointed that it wasn't met in 2020. But I think the critical point that the UK recognized is we had to, going into COP, be able to find ways to raise the level of ambition on climate finance such that we could point to when that number would in fact be achieved and that in fact it would be overachieved going forward. And we have done that through this process. And I think that's an incredibly important part of building trust in advance of what is a critically important COP.
I hope that's okay. I'm just going to try and take one more question to try and even it up. Mia Rabson from Canada.
Hi, yes, I've looked at the list on the COP website of the countries that have made their new ambition known, and it seems that there's several countries that were supposed to be on that list that aren't listed there. Are we expecting those countries to come forward during COP with their new commitments? And if not, why are we not expecting that?
Well, Mia, let me take that. As public commitments are put out and countries make their finance commitments public, then obviously it'll appear on the website itself. And I think this may be the last question. So I just want to, certainly from my side, once again thank Jochen and Jonathan for working so hard on this. The three of us have had some good discussions with donor nations and with the multilateral development banks, and I do believe that the numbers that have been produced here are robust, and it is is a cause for optimism going into COP. The fact that over the 5-year period, it is highly likely that we will go above 500 billion.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we couldn't get round everybody. Try to be as fair as possible and split it between all the different countries of interest. Thanks everyone for joining us.